Welcome to Clap Back with the Facts podcast, where we are providing you with the information you need to know about what's politically impacting Black women across the country. In a world filled with mis and disinformation, we provide you with the real. If you're a Black woman, representing Black women, or in the community with Black women, we are here to clap back and give you the facts. Thank you for joining Season 2, Episode 15, Why It's More Important Than Ever to Celebrate Juneteenth. We will be sharing the facts and dropping gems, so let's get ready to clap back with the facts.
Hello, hello, hello. It must be Thursday. Why? Because I am here, Holly Holiday, President, Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote, and we are here with the clap back. Oh my God, it is Juneteenth. And you know, this felt like a moment to really intentionally remind people of why Juneteenth is so important. Juneteenth is more important than ever, I would say, because it's not just a celebration of freedom. It is a reminder of the struggle and the resilience and the unfinished work of justice in this America, in the states that we live in, Lord. Listen, in recent years, heck, we don't even have to talk about recent year. In this year, there has been a real push to censor and sanitize our history, especially Black histories, in our schools, in our discourse, and it's time for us to tell the truth. Juneteenth pushes back against all of that and says the freedom of Black people was delayed, denied, and hard fought. We're going to hear more about Juneteenth in a video coming up, but I think of Juneteenth as the ultimate clapback moment. So let's start with this video featuring Annette Gordon-Reed, who is a noted historian and author of the book on Juneteenth.
I'm Annette Gordon-Reed. I'm the Carl M. Loeb University Professor at Harvard University. I wrote a book called On Juneteenth, which is a memoir and a history mixed together. I'm a historian by profession. I usually write about other people, other people's families. So this was something of a departure for me to actually try to do history through my family's story. My family has been in Texas for many generations. I could count back to or trace back to the 1820s in Texas on one side of my family, and the 1850s on another side. So I felt that I was equipped and I had the right to be able to tell this story of Juneteenth, which is June 19th, 1865. That's the day when General Gordon Granger came to Texas and announced the end of slavery at the end of the Civil War. Most people think that the Civil War ended in April of 1865 when Lee surrendered at Appomattox. But the Army of the Trans-Mississippi, that is, the Texas Army was a part of that, kept fighting. They kept fighting up until June. In fact, the last battle of the Civil War was fought in Texas, and the Confederates actually won. They won that battle, but they understood that the war was essentially over, and they surrendered in June 2nd, 1865. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed before then, 3 years before then, by Lincoln. And as the Army of the United States moved across the South, it helped liberate enslaved people from plantations, and the enslaved people liberated themselves in many instances, running away to join the Army of the United States. But they kept fighting in Texas, so there was no way for them to declare slavery was over until the fighting stopped. When it stopped in June 2nd, that's when Granger makes arrangements and goes to Galveston, Texas, lands at Galveston with troops, and makes the announcement that slavery is over. The story is told that he stood on a balcony and read out General Order Number 3, which proclaimed the end of slavery. He probably did that, or he may have done that, but they also went around the town and posted placards saying that slavery was over. There was a great amount of jubilation on the part of enslaved people. There was also a lot of anger on the part of the former enslavers because they had lost their property rights. And one of the things that I found as I was researching the book was there were a number of instances where people who celebrated were actually punished for celebration. One story in one particular town, dozens of people were whipped for celebrating the end of slavery. And you can imagine how happy they must have been, but at the same time, the amount of resentment that was on the other side. So one of the things that I found, or one of the things that I started to think about, is that Juneteenth, as it was shortened to it, at first it was called Emancipation Day, but June 19th, shortened to Juneteenth, was as much of a beginning as it was an ending. Legalized slavery ended, but the struggle for African American rights in Texas and across the country just really started during that time period. General Order Number 3 that was read aloud also said that now, at that time, the former slaves would occupy a position of absolute equality with their former enslavers. Now you can imagine how that fell on the ears of the enslaved people and how it fell on the ears of their former enslavers. It was not something that was accomplished right away. It's something that we're still working on, as a matter of fact, but it was the beginning of that journey in the state and also across the country to make sure that the promises of the Declaration of Independence actually came true and we fulfilled America's creed. So it was wonderful doing the book, finding out about my family, but also doing this at a time when the holiday became a national holiday. My book came out in May, and the president made it a national holiday in June. So it worked out very, very well for me. And I'm glad that it's a holiday now that people will celebrate as a family story, but also as an advance in human rights.
All righty. Well, listen, no one but maybe Opal Lee herself can tell the story of Juneteenth better than Dr. Annette Gordon-Reed, noted historian. Well, we're not going to have this conversation with just me and y'all. So we got to bring up my sister, Chantel Mullen. Hey, girl. Hey.
Hey, Holly, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be talking about Juneteenth today. I'm excited that we are still celebrating Juneteenth, despite the rumors that may not be a thing. Despite the efforts to try to take us away, we still here.
You know what? That we are.
So I want to, there's so much that Juneteenth brings up for me, and I don't know about for you, but I think for me, it starts with this is really an opportunity of culture and pride, right? That we are really still here. And that despite what they try to say about, first of all, incorrectly categorizing diversity as only a Black thing, and then suggesting that having Black people means that you have less than. Juneteenth is like our peacock moment where we get to really just shout and scream and yell from the rooftops about Black excellence and joy, all evidence, frankly, for me, by our survival. I like to think about it, hey, we still here and we are rising. What's it bringing up for you?
It's bringing up all of those things. But one thing that it absolutely brings up for me is it is a day of remembrance, a day of understanding, and a day of celebrating what our ancestors went through to get freedom.
Yeah.
And how hard that struggle was.
Yeah.
So, we can have fun on Juneteenth, but there were real life consequences And it really, I hope for some, is a day of reflection. And
Yeah.
actually, it could also be a day of learning,
Yeah.
because some of the strategies that were used to get to Juneteenth are very much strategies we need to look at, learn, and apply as needed.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I love you. She said in a video, and you invoked this for me. It was an ending to some things, but a beginning to other things. That really struck me. And I knew you were going to bring up learning. I knew you were going to see this as an educational moment. I knew that was coming. So what in the spirit of an educational moment, what are some things you might recommend or suggest?
Well, there are a lot of books out here.
Yes, indeed.
And we have a lot of African American museums.
Mm.
For me, I think particularly at this moment in time, we should be thinking about looking, one, at the civil rights movement.
Okay.
Two, looking at pre-Reconstruction, Reconstruction, and post-Reconstruction, because we were able, and when I say we, I'm talking about Black folks. I can't speak to nobody else.
Okay.
There were some things that Black people were able to do post-Reconstruction that we haven't even been able to duplicate in modern times.
Wow.
There are some things that Black people were able to do during the civil rights movement that we have not been able to duplicate in modern times.
Like what? Like what are some of the things that you think about when you think about things we haven't been able to duplicate?
Well, we haven't been able to pass some major legislation.
Go ahead now.
I mean, because I tell people this. Under threat of death, it was a death sentence in some instances to go vote. Everybody who was in elected office was either a segregationist, a racist, segregationist adjacent, racist adjacent, all of the above. There weren't that many Black, there were nominal Black people in office when civil, especially at the federal level. There may have been more at the local level. At the federal level, there were nominal Black people in office, and Black people were able to get the Civil Rights Act passed. They were able to get the Voting Rights Act passed. They had a litigation strategy that we have not duplicated to this day, where they found plaintiffs. You know, I tell folks, a lot of people don't recognize that a lot of stuff that people are seeing today from other folks duplicate what happened in the civil rights movement and the voting rights movement, because they were very strategic about who were their plaintiffs. There were test cases that ran before then. So by the time they got to court, they knew what would and would not work. They had a group of lawyers who were great civil rights lawyers, and the community, and let me say this one more time, because I don't think they hear me in the back row.
We need to hear you in the back row, in the cheap seat.
In the cheap seat. The community sustained these lawyers so they could go out and do the important civil rights work. Because I don't know if y'all know, civil rights don't pay nothing.
Hello.
So if you want somebody to fight for your rights, you've got to have a strategy. Because don't make me have to fight for my light bill and also be fighting.
Look. Now that's a real thing.
And I think we talk about it enough. That
I agree.
Communities literally sustained the civil rights warriors so they could go out and do the work full time.
Listen, Martin Luther King couldn't be doing what he's doing and trying to clock in 9 to 5. It ain't gonna work.
Amen.
He can't be punching the clock and marching and having a dream. It's
Amen.
a whole different subset.
Amen.
I love that. I love that you're leading us here, because I think Juneteenth is also connecting the things that have happened in the past, as you suggested, but also it's the lens by which we look through for today's struggle. You know, we have still systemic racism, police brutality, economic inequality, and of course, voter suppression. So we got a lot more liberation to fight for. I wonder what liberation, or shall I say even freedom, looks like for us now.
Ooh. Well,
it's interesting because as I'm thinking about this question, even my own self, I was like, ooh, if you had asked me this last week, you know, before we had senators thrown to the ground, before charges against Congresswoman McIver for doing her job, you know, before the birthday parade, the $45 million waste of my tax dollars, I might have had a little bit different answer. So I'm feeling a little aggressive today, but I'm going to let you go first.
Well, you know.
He said, you know, uh-oh.
Well, you know, and I know this ain't where we supposed to go, but you asked me the question.
I asked the question. Come on. I guess we going here.
Because one of the things that I have been living with for a long, I guess about 10 years now, I didn't realize it had been 10 years. There's a passage in the Bible that just sits with me. And it is the Passover, but also when God's people are released from Egypt and they go across, and, you know, the Red Sea opens up and they go across, and, you know, they're still over there. What this reminds me of is even when you make progress, there are those who are going to work to set you back. There are those that are going to be too scared to go forward. There are those for which the fear of the unknown will have them go back to harsh conditions because they at least know what to expect there. That we will be led by the few, and we're going to have to drag the many. And oftentimes, even when you make big wins, and let me just tell you how I feel about this, because if you think of and start looking at when the Civil Rights Act was passed and when the Voting Rights Act was passed, those were passed right mid-60s, 64 and 65. It's tight to go back, hit it about 40 years. So there's about a 40 to 50 year cycle where even when you make progress, there's a group that's going to claw you back and have you wandering out in the wilderness. Where we are right now is we are wandering out in the wilderness. We want leaders to stand up, but also what happened in the wilderness, quiet as it's kept, because we don't really talk about it. A whole bunch of folks died off.
Wow.
A whole bunch of folks didn't make the trip because of all of it.
I hadn't even thought about that. That's crazy.
So we are in a cycle right now. I thought it was COVID because a whole lot of folks didn't make it out of COVID.
Well,
this might be the cycle where people have to, and what we also learned from that is people will complain even when it's not that bad, because they got on the other side. They out of slavery. They no longer making bricks. They no longer making bricks without straw. They get on the other side, and all they got to do is walk. They wake up every morning, there's water, there's food. All they've got to do is keep walking. They wake up every morning, there's water and there's food. They equated that condition to being as bad as it was back in Egypt. So when we think about some of the stuff that's happened, even when we had policies that were pushing us forward, it wasn't, fireworks and rocket ships. It was just the regular stuff that moves us forward. People were like, oh my gosh, it's horrible out here. Oh my God, it's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible. And in some instances, it is. But they were blaming the wrong people for the policies. Those housing policies in your communities that are trash and y'all can't build housing, that ain't the president. That's your mayor. That's your council.
Yeah, that's right. Probably because I recently just gave this speech. I've been giving this speech a lot lately, and it is the speech of resilience, and like answer to the question, what do we do now? What do we do next? What should we be doing in this moment? And in answering that question, and I talk about, well, let's talk about what you actually want to change. What is, and I think going back to the freedom question, what is freedom really looking like? What is it that we're in pursuit of? What are the things that need to change in order for us to achieve freedom? I think, the second part of that is, who are we doing it with? Because we can't do it by ourselves. This ain't a solo dolo project. You got to get you a tribe. You got to find you a team. You got to be part of some collective. And I say as many as you can stand, doing as many things as you can stand, right? I think it is then, to your point, what's the strategy? How are we thinking it out? How are we paying the bills and moving forward? How are we maintaining? How are we preparing for what's next? How are we doing the things that we know? How are we, cultivating allies and, figuring out what are those steps that it takes to achieve that. It is something that we talk about a little bit, but it is showing up. It's not just, and showing up has a lot of different faces now. Sometimes it's the show up on Zoom. Sometimes it's showing up in person. Sometimes it may just be walking out your house and talking to the person who literally lives next door to you. Show up is important, and not just show up, but show up and engage. As in the church references, we don't need just the pew sitters now. We need some ushers, some choir members, some trustees. We looking for the folks that's going to stand up. And then I think most importantly, we have to create space where others can join us, where we're bringing others with us, where we're creating. And it ain't gonna be everybody, to your point. It wasn't everybody in the civil rights. We all got different roles to play, but we got to make space for the folks who want to join. And that the way in which they join and the way in which they fight is not going to be the same. And when I think about what freedom looks like for me, it is being able to show up the way you choose to define your show up, meaning however you identify, and share your ideas and thoughts free of persecution, even if I don't agree with them. And it's acknowledging that people who show up with a different perspective, with a different way to get the job done, even when we're headed towards the same destination, that's okay. I said designation. Destination. I got a map metaphor going and I got confused in the mapping. But people who show up and we all headed to the same destination, we ought to be able to say, okay, it's fine with me if you take a bike. I'm gonna be in limo service, but if you want to ride your bicycle, go right ahead. If you got helicopter service, I'm jealous, but I'm gonna let you do that. We are tolerant of that. That's part of freedom to me.
But you know what? I think we need to start with a more fundamental question. And you asked me, and I was struggling with it. What is freedom? Because I honestly don't think we're operating from the same definition.
It don't matter.
Yes, it does.
Because people operate from different definitions, as long as your definition doesn't restrict my definition.
Well, and that's where we have the problem. Right there. But that's another conversation. We have to think about how to be allies, and even allies when we don't agree. It's the thing that I tell people. I vote for certain things even when it doesn't impact me, because I know down the road, if my allies are better, they can help me out, even if I don't agree with everything.
There's right.
I vote for that I know full well, and it doesn't impact me. It doesn't help me, and sometimes it might actually hinder me for a moment.
Listen, that's a fact. But I think, this is kind of like, even in thinking about the celebration of Juneteenth, right? It's great that we are celebrating it. Thank you, President Biden, by the way, President Biden, for finally, the Black person didn't do it. It took President Biden to enact and make Juneteenth officially a federal holiday. So thank you, President Biden. Let me say that a couple of times for the people in the back. But I think what it also reminds us is that freedom is a responsibility.
Yes, it is.
That we have to do something. Yes, we should celebrate, and I don't want to take that away from anybody, because I will definitely be doing joyful things. But we also have to recognize that recognition without action is hollow. We must hold ourselves and our institutions accountable. That this is an opportunity for us to invest in community, that this is an opportunity for us to create change, that this is an opportunity for us to just teach history. I think that, to your point and the point that you're consistently making about learning, change doesn't have to just look like a protest, lining up for the No Kings demonstration. Change could look like sitting in your neighborhood and hosting Black history stories for children. Change can look like, sharing stuff online to educate people about what's happening because you happen to attend the school board meeting or the city council hearing. These are all ways in which we can participate outside of just ourselves. Change can look like care for your community. Hell, change can look like making a donation to Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. Just putting that out there. There's all kind of places and ways in which we are, being accountable and taking responsibility.
Well, Holly, I have a key. I don't know if this is a summary or a key takeaway, because you just made me think of something.
Okay.
That I've really been wrestling with this, but literally it just kind of put together in my head. You were talking about responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we got to maybe the early 70s, mid 70s, Black folks, not all, because I'm not talking in absolutes.
Thank you for that.
There were, because I can speak, well, let me just speak personally for me.
Okay.
I was able to grow up without politics. Now, well, and let me explain it this way.
Yeah, go ahead. I love this.
We weren't protesting. I knew there was racism. It felt more like an isolated incident than a systemic issue. But every day, I wasn't thinking about, am I going to get killed if I go to the store? You know, when I went to college, yes, my college was next door to a sundown town. But that was really the first time I was really on heightened thinking about it. You know, I wasn't thinking about the Ku Klux Klan every day. I wasn't thinking about people burning crosses in my yard. Some of that stuff happened to older members of my family, but I think I'm in that gap generation where some of us were able to be free from having to be politically involved every day. You know,
I think that's right. I mean, I think that coming out of the 60s, parents of children in the 70s and 80s and maybe even into the 90s sought to create a space for their kids that felt safe and protected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and that's true. And neither did I experience any of those things. I wasn't worried every day about the Klan. I wasn't thinking about necessarily racism in general. I think there were some isolated incidences that did not feel systemic to me, even as a child. But I will say that politics has just as a counterpoint and just different experience has always been a part of my life. And my mother tells a story of being 3 days old and she had to get a mailing out for an election that was happening. So she had to bundle me up and take me down. And we were not, but I will say this, the things that we were fighting for, felt much closer than the things that I think about now. Today, I think about the big picture stuff. Mm-hmm. But as I share with people, some folks have that assignment to think about the big picture stuff. But I think if more people just started the way I started at 3 days old, thinking about the stuff that's really in front of them, thinking about the ways that the system is not just accepting the system for what it is, but thinking about the ways that rules, laws, and the system disproportionately impact them in negative ways to their counterparts, and how they stand up and fight for those things. And I'm talking about things like, you know, access to healthy food in your neighborhood, guarantees of clean water and air. I mean, basic things. Mm-hmm. I lived in a food desert growing up. I didn't know I lived in a food desert. But what if I had been engaged in that fight a little bit earlier? How many generations would have had access to greater foods and health and may have impacted their long-term health outcomes? My point is that sometimes, and I think you're right, because I look at a lot of my colleagues and friends and people in my network, they came to politics later in life and didn't understand, or didn't, I shouldn't say understand because that's not correct. What I should say is they had less awareness around how politics was impacting them. And they were, in some ways, in the protection from all the evil things, because I think it was out of love that parents sought to protect children from this. But in that protection zone, it also gave us a sense of what it could be like, gave us that vision. And now, how do we give that vision to the world? How do we make that happen? I didn't have that particular vision, but I did understand that if we put some effort into it, things could get better. And so I saw things change. I saw, for instance, one of the things that my family always fought for was when I was growing up, we didn't have streets, roads, or buildings named after Black people. And in Kansas City, one of the traditions has been to name things after local people, up until very recently when some outsiders came in and made us rename one of our roads to Martin Luther King Boulevard. But before that, all of our streets were named for local people. not very many Black people. I've seen that change over the years. I've seen, Emmanuel Cleaver 2 Boulevard come in. I've seen schools named after Julia Hill, who was a longtime school board member. I've seen those kinds of things change, and it made me understand that with effort, change is possible.
And I agree. And what I think we should use Juneteenth for,
okay,
is to think about the past and how they had to be very reactive and hyper aware of politics, but also think about that space where we have seen the possibility and marry the two and plot a pathway forward.
Yeah.
Because we can't be so divorced from politics and the power that we don't understand how that impacts us, how we actually need that, and we need it to move our communities forward and bring resources for our community and our families. I think in some ways we divorce that and become very hyper individual. I can do it, where Juneteenth was a collective effort. We need to think about the collective movement forward.
I love that. That's a whole word. And I'll just follow you and end with something really simple. Juneteenth offers a moment to pause, to breathe, and to celebrate. It's a reminder that even in the struggle, we create joy, beauty, and power. Let's be honest. Juneteenth is a celebration of Black people, our culture, and our history, period. And I put that on everything. So if you haven't quite figured it out, we are celebrating Juneteenth up in here, and hopefully have answered the question for you of why it's more important to celebrate than ever. And while we happen to be two Black sisters, I want to remind people that Juneteenth is a moment to celebrate Black people for everybody, not just Black people. That's my word, and I think we can be out. I want to let you know we'll be back next Thursday. Oh, actually, no, we won't be back next Thursday. We're taking a little bit of a break. We're bringing on some interns. They're going to help us get some things together. So we're going to be taking a little bit of a break. But I thought this was a good space to end on Juneteenth. And we will use Juneteenth to officially take our pause. In the meantime, you may have missed some of our incredible episodes of the past. So please, while we are on break, take this opportunity to go back and check out some of our and your favorite Clap Back, Get the Fact podcast. We're in season 2, so you got a lot of stuff you can be catching up on. Until then, we'll see you probably end of July, early August. Watch our social media, follow us, subscribe, like, and do all the things to find out when you can see us next. Because, y'all, it's time for us to take a breath. I'm headed to Jamaica, y'all. I'll see y'all when I get back.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us here on Clap Back, Get the Facts podcast. We hope that you're leaving feeling more informed and ready to provide others with the facts. We would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this episode. So post the show on your Instagram story and tag us at Sisters Lead. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please leave a review so others can get some sense of the facts that we're providing. Finally, if you would like to learn more about local resources and other projects we're working on, go to Sisters Lead.